We're fortunate to live in an era of remarkable technological advancement. Just 2 decades ago, the idea that you could access and download this video from anywhere in the world on a wireless device would have seemed impossible. Someone had to invent the technology we now depend on to make this experience possible. While we understand how the internet was developed and how it functions, what remains a mystery is how the technology featured in this video could have existed in the time period it appears to come from. Safely navigating a ship across the ocean has never been an easy job, even with all the benefits of modern technology. Without GPS, digital maps, and an understanding of the tides, it would be even harder. 500 years ago, mariners set off across the oceans almost blind, apart from the limited maps they had available to them. But it seems they did have one basic tool, an astrolabe like this one, which is thought to be the oldest marine navigation tool in the world. It was found in the wreck of the Esmeralda, a Portuguese ship that sank in 1503, trying to cross the Indian Ocean. At first glance, it was thought to be nothing more than a steel medallion or piece of jewelry, but digital scanning at the University of Warwick in England revealed details that had been eroded too badly to be seen by the naked eye. As can be seen here, the device is covered by notches, ridges, and other markings around the edges, all of which are positioned at intervals of 5 degrees. That strongly suggests that this is an astrolabe, and a navigator would be able to use it to measure the position of the sun in the sky. That, in turn, would help them track both the time of day and their relative direction. It's not a secret that there used to be many different species of animals on this planet that have now become extinct. Fresh examples are found fairly regularly, but the discovery of a previously unknown type of gibbon in a Chinese tomb in 2018 left the archaeologists who discovered it totally perplexed. The tomb had lain undisturbed for around 2,300 years in Shaanxi province and also contained the remains of a lynx, a black bear, and 2 leopards. It's thought, but cannot be proven, that the human occupant of the tomb was Lady Xia, grandmother to China's first emperor, King Shi Huang. Extensive testing of the gibbon's skull revealed that it wasn't connected to any other species, alive or dead, and so it's the only example of the animal ever found. Records from China of the same time suggest that gibbons were viewed as noble, and so this one may have been Lady Xia's pet companion. Scientists are now going to have to undertake fuller work to find out whether this was a common practice, and if there are any more remains of this type of gibbon out there waiting to be found. When do you imagine the human race first began fitting prosthetic limbs and digits to people who were missing them? Unless you guessed 3,000 years ago, then you're wrong. Not only do we know that the ancient Egyptians were making prosthetics 3,000 years ago, but they were making them out of wood. And we can prove it because here's an example that survived to this day. This wooden toe was found still attached to the ancient Egyptian mummy it was buried with, and close inspection of it has revealed it was refitted and re-engineered to fit the foot of its owner better several times before she was buried. That means that the expert who designed and fitted it for her had an understanding of human physiology that would be considered stunningly advanced for the time they lived in. Modern prosthetics researchers have been very complimentary about the quality of the prosthesis, which would have been fitted with a belt strap, and thus been as mobile as the rest of her foot. Right now, military forces all over the world are experimenting with the potential of using exoskeletons as combat armor. Based on the sculptures inside the Medici chapels in Florence, Italy, it appears that someone else had the same idea centuries ago, but may not have had humans in mind when they came up with their design. Allegedly, the unsettling sculptures inside the chapels are supposed to represent knights, but their features clearly aren't human. Several of the statues are adorned with tentacles like something out of a Japanese manga, and one of them depicts a strange worm-shaped entity emerging from the top of a suit of armor. In fact, almost everywhere there should be a human limb, there's a serpent-like creature covered in scales or suckers. Similar animals can be seen in reliefs on the walls close to the sculptures, apparently wearing battle helmets. What could the sculptors have seen that would inspire designs like this? Experts can't even begin to tell us what they're supposed to represent. One way of describing the Halsaflini hypogeum in Malta would be as an underground mass grave containing more than 7,000 bodies. That's a fairly grim description, so it might be more helpful to think of it as a beautiful work of art made by unknown builders using incredible skills. Incredibly, even though the 6,000-year-old structure sits barely 30 feet below the busy streets of Malta, it wasn't discovered until someone tried to build a water cistern in 1902. The whole sweeping, curving hypogeum is carved directly into limestone and splits into 3 layers. The final chamber has been designed in such a way that any sound made inside it echoes throughout the whole structure and can resonate within the human mind to affect the emotions. This is known as infrasound technology, and its existence should have been way beyond the comprehension of people living 1,500 years before Stonehenge was built in England. Even more mysteriously, the skulls of many of the bodies buried there are elongated compared to modern standards, and testing has revealed that the elongation was a genetic trait. Who were these long-skulled people, and how did they understand so much about sound engineering? All cults and religions have their own sacred symbols and sacred items, and we've usually been able to decipher the meaning of most of them. The purpose of the hand of Sabazius remains a mystery, though. In fact, it represents the only piece of evidence that the cult of Sabazius, once thought to be a myth, ever existed at all. The cult existed across civilizations in the ancient world, with both Romans and Greeks becoming members as long ago as the 3rd century CE. Instead of being a unique system of beliefs, Sabazius worshippers borrowed elements from several other religions of the time, including the Far Eastern concept of an afterlife. Followers of the cult occasionally wore these solid bronze hands, but some examples show signs of once being mounted on poles, perhaps for marches or demonstrations. Sabazius was a god of both fertility and vegetation, with the fertility aspect perhaps explaining why there are so many snake symbols on the hands we've discovered. Although we found the hands, we've never found a single temple devoted to Sabazius, so it's possible that the cult who followed the deity met in secret. We've already seen one take on ancient refrigeration technology from the ancient world, but here's a different take on the idea from ancient China. It's called a jian, and the oldest example of one discovered so far is more than 2,500 years old. Primarily used as a means of chilling wine and keeping it fresh, jians worked so well that they were still in everyday use in China until the 17th century, meaning the idea could be considered more than 4,000 years ahead of its time. A jian is made out of bronze, containing 2 layers with a thin layer of ice between them to keep the contents of the inner layer cool. After looking at this, we're left to conclude that the Chinese people of ancient times were very serious about looking after their wine. We are also left to conclude that whoever came up with this idea was such a genius that nobody could improve on their design for several millennia. If you want to go looking for historical facts and evidence, a museum is a good place to go looking. Surely, no museum would exhibit something which they know to be false. If that's the case, though, why is there a skeleton of a mermaid at the Danish National Museum in Copenhagen? Is the so-called mermaid of Harald Skær evidence that the legendary creatures exist? Hidden in plain sight. The story associated with the skeleton is that it was found in Harald Skær by a farmer who was plowing his field in 2012, who took it to an expert and was informed that it was the remains of a Hydranymphus pesci, the allegedly scientific name for a mermaid. The official version of events, on the other hand, is that it's a fake skeleton made by the Danish artist Mette Ruud for a special exhibition. The explanation that it was made by an artist certainly sounds a lot more plausible, but that hasn't done anything to stop a whole community of people on the internet from claiming that the skeleton is genuine, and any suggestion to the contrary is a cover-up. Hidden away in the ancient Sanskrit and Hindu texts is a series of references that scientists would rather nobody paid any attention to because they suggest a troubling piece of lost technology. Specifically, we're talking about Vimanas. The stories of Vimanas are generally seen as fanciful myths about flying chariots or even whole flying palaces, but there are worryingly descriptive sections of text that strongly imply that the writers have seen them working in real life. The oldest mention, found in the Veda Sanskrit text written 3,500 years ago, describes jumping into the air in a craft that uses fire and water, and goes on to explain the internal arrangement of the aircraft, which included a wheel, 12 pillars, 300 pivots, and 60 controls. The Ramayana texts also refer to the Vimanas and state that they were a luxury reserved only for the ruling elite. Looking at the Mahabharata texts, we find descriptions of not only flying machines, but flying machines that use sound technology to fire missiles at targets on the ground. All of these things are recorded in black and white. So why does nobody speak of them? Our ancestors had many weird and wonderful burial traditions. If you were fortunate enough to be ancient Egyptian nobility, you would likely be buried in a glorious tomb with a fine sarcophagus. If, on the other hand, you were a medieval peasant, you were more likely to end up discarded thoughtlessly in a pit. If you were very rich and lived in China during the 4th century, though, you might have ended up inside one of these incredibly ornate jade burial suits. Weaved together with threads made from gold and silver, the first written record of the suits comes from the year 320 CE. Although there's some anecdotal evidence that they were around a few hundred years before that, not until 1968 did archaeologists confirm their existence by finding a real-life example. And when they found one, they found two. The two jade suits you see here belong to Prince Liu Shang and Princess Doan, his wife, and they date back to the Han Dynasty. It's thought that making a single one of the suits would be 10 years worth of labor, even for a skilled jadesmith. Why jade was chosen as the material is unknown. It's porous, and so the skeletons within the suits had almost crumbled away completely. Some of the examples of ancient technology we are showing in this video are open to interpretation. But here's one that's a solid recognized scientific fact. The people who lived 2,000 years ago were better at gilding objects than we are today. And science is at a total loss to explain how it was done. Literally hundreds of gilded items have been recovered from the era, including decorative items taken from temples. And yet we've never found any explanation as to how the gilding was done. If we used electroplating, we could achieve an effect similar to the one we see on some of these old artifacts. But it still wouldn't quite match it for quality. And that's before we even consider the point that electroplating didn't exist until the 19th century. In some cases, it would appear that a thin layer of mercury was used as a solvent to bind thin sheets of gold and silver to objects as decoration. But such a method would be considered insanely dangerous, even with modern precautions. The criminals of 2,000 years ago used their gilding skills to disguise low-value objects as much more valuable items. But we can't even replicate the capabilities of the fraudsters. One of the strangest items in England's Royal Armoury's collection is the horned helmet, which looks a little like something you might see in a steampunk movie or a horror film. It's in immaculate condition and looks like it could have been made yesterday, but it's actually over 500 years old. The Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I commissioned it as a gift for England's young king Henry VIII in 1511. But historians can't agree on the reasons why. It's solid and sturdy and would presumably have been worn as a part of a suit of armor. But there's no record of the king wearing it into battle, nor any record of anyone else going into battle wearing such a bizarre headgear. It could therefore have been a ceremonial use. But what kind of ceremony would call for the full face mask like this? Why does there appear to be something running from the mask's nose? And why does it have spectacles? The meaning is probably symbolic. Nobody has any clue what it's supposed to symbolize. Modern ability to take satellite images of remote locations is shedding new light on ancient mysteries left behind by our ancestors. NASA was responsible for taking the first pictures of the steppe geoglyphs in Kazakhstan, but not even they can explain who made them or why they were arranged in such unusual shapes. There are over 250 ramparts and mounds in the area, covering the region of northern Turkey and dating back to the Neolithic era. The geoglyphs take the shape of crosses, circles, and even curly swastikas, but wouldn't be visible when seen from the ground. They could only be made sense of from high above. As the people who made them didn't have the technology to fly, why would they build things that nobody would be able to see clearly for thousands of years? We think of the people of this era as little more than primitive tribes of hunter-gatherers, yet projects like creating these geoglyphs would require mass cooperation and organization. Perhaps civilization, as we know it, started a lot earlier than we think it did. Staying in the United Kingdom for a moment, we head north to Scotland. We'll find many examples of Neolithic art, known as either towie stones or towie balls. They're not especially rare, but finding multiple examples of them doesn't get us any closer to understanding why they were made or what they were used for. The first example turned up in Aberdeenshire in the 19th century, but more of them were still found as recently as 2013. They're small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, measuring on average between 2 and 5 inches in diameter, and can be made of any common rock from granite to sandstone. Rather than being spherical, they're deliberately covered in raised areas and decorated with intricate lines and circle patterns. Similar patterns have also been found on artifacts belonging to the Picts, who lived in Scotland 2,800 years ago, but the stones are far older than that. Theories as to their use range from a potential use as weapons to a sort of resume carried around by masons to demonstrate their skills when seeking paid employment. But they're just guesses. The creation of the Mamantillo in Peru was so far ahead of its time that even now, 1,300 years after its invention, the principles behind it are being recreated to assist modern cities during times of drought. In basic terms, a mamantillo is a system used to harvest water from wet, mountainous regions and redirect it down to ground level, where it can create reservoirs and water deposits, thus saving whole cities from going thirsty during the heat of the summer. Displaying a unique understanding of the absorption properties of various types of stone and mud, the pre-Columbian civilization who built the first mamantillos used a series of water channels not dissimilar to canals to redirect water as it ran off the mountains, diverting it to permeable rock and soil, where it would take time to penetrate through layers of solid ground. Weeks or sometimes months later, the water would re-emerge further down the slope, where it could be safely collected and stored. It's thought that the Andean wari culture was the first to use mamantillos, although it's impossible to say for sure. Life for infants was a lot harder in the ancient world than it is now. Only a third of babies born during the Bronze Age lived through their first year, and even then, 2/3 of them would pass away before becoming adults. That doesn't mean that their parents were neglectful or uncaring, though. In fact, if experts are right about the purpose of these ornate drinking vessels, they weren't totally dissimilar to the parents of today. These cute cups have been found all over Germany, and the analysis of their contents has proven that they once contained the milk of a variety of domesticated animals. The oldest of the cups found to date is 3,200 years old. It's believed that the animal designs were intended to make the cups more attractive to children, and therefore encourage them to drink their milk. They might even have doubled up as toys. The people of the time would have no way to pasteurize their milk, so drinking it was dangerous, but they couldn't have known that. Similar designs can be seen in the baby bottles of the 21st century. In the 21st century, modern militaries fantasize about having high-powered laser technology to defeat their enemies quickly and easily. 1,400 years ago, the armies of the Byzantine Empire were using a technology that worked to similar principles. They came up with something known as Greek fire, a primitive flamethrower that could ignite an enemy ship from a distance. It was first recorded as being used in Constantinople in the year 673, and might even have ignited upon contact with the water. No other empire or civilization of the time had a weapon anything like as powerful, and its existence was crucial to both the salvation and the spread of the Byzantines. They even manufactured pressure hoses to concentrate the fire of the liquid, which must have been an awesome and terrifying spectacle. Even today, historians can't agree on the precise chemical composition of Greek fire. It's thought that quicklime, sulfur, naphtha, and calcium phosphide were involved, but the secret of its ingredients, and therefore the key to recreating it, has been lost to time. The French cartoon character Asterix is known and loved all throughout the world. He's a funny but fearless freedom fighter who entertained and inspired several generations since his first appearance in 1959. Could he have had a real-life equivalent, though? We ask because of the July 2019 discovery of a mysterious ancient Gaelic warrior in West Sussex, England. Based on the style of this ornate headdress, it's thought that the warrior was French and probably came to Britain in an attempt to fend off the advances of Julius Caesar's Roman Empire. Somewhere around the year 50 CE, England is full of warrior graves, but none quite as well knitted out as this one. His sword is one of a kind, and the helmet features elaborate crests that would have made him appear much taller than he actually was, and therefore probably much more intimidating on the battlefield. Also found at the burial site was a beautiful headdress, which may have been an indicator of his rank. His identity, though, is sadly a secret that's been lost to time and may never be recovered. Mold gold capes spent hundreds of years hidden away inside a hill in Wales, Great Britain. When it was eventually discovered in 1833, the experts of the time looked upon it in wonder. Then, just as now, it represents the most exquisite piece of gold working ever discovered from prehistoric Europe. The strange hill it was found inside also worked as its protector. It's known as the Goblin Hill, and superstitions about its supernatural properties kept locals away from it for centuries. Dating back to the Bronze Era, the garment was probably ritualistic, where for an individual of high status, either a royal or religious figure. The cape's size suggests the owner was female and may even have been a forgotten queen of ancient Britain. Gold craftsmanship like this from thousands of years ago is usually associated more with the ancient Egyptians than the ancient Europeans, and even they would have been hard-pressed to come up with something this ornate and detailed. Having spares of important items is useful. You might have a spare wallet, a spare purse, or a spare phone charger, or a spare tire for your car. How about a spare head? That idea sounds ridiculous, but it's one theory about why so many ancient Egyptian tombs contain sculptures of human heads, all of which have personalized features and are probably intended to resemble the appearance of a deceased person buried in the tomb. It's known that the ancient Egyptians believed that the dead would reanimate in the afterlife, after they'd been buried, but it's possible that if a diseased person had suffered severe head trauma or lost their head, they would need a new one to complete the reanimation process. 30 of the heads have been found so far, with the earliest dating back to the reign of Sneferu in 2613 BCE. While the features are unique, the hair is always cropped close, and traces of paint on some of the heads suggest that they were painted a vivid shade of red. The traditions of the time meant that funerary statues were always placed above the ground, and so the placement of these so-called reserve heads far below the surface is unusual. The spearhead idea is only a theory, but it's the best theory we have. If you want to store ice in warm weather, you'll need a freezer. To our modern minds, that would necessitate the use of electricity to power the freezer with, but our ancestors didn't have the luxury of electricity 2,400 years ago. Despite that, they appear to understand the basic principles that guide the freezing process, which is how the ancient Persians were able to build yakhals in the middle of the desert. The name Ayakal translates into English as ice pit, but the buildings don't resemble pits. They look more like grand mounds or temples. On average, each Ayakal was 60 feet tall and contained a system of water funneled in from nearby springs and wind catchers to cool the water with, allowing for frozen items to maintain their state. The innovative evaporative cooling system inside the structures means that even today, when you go and stand inside one, you'll feel like you've stepped into a giant refrigeration unit. A coating of clay, sand, egg whites, and goat hairs on the exterior insulated the domes against the heat of the desert sun, even in the middle of summer. The stone of Tizok is so mysterious that archaeologists can't even agree on whether the artifact appears the same way now as it did when it was first created during the 15th century, or whether it was amended a century later by way of a round depression carved into the top. It's definitely an Aztec object and might have been a quaxicali, a fairly gruesome stone altar used to hold human hearts after ritualistic sacrifices. The stone, which measures almost 10 feet across the center, was discovered by road workers in December 1791. All around the side of the stones are depictions of a warrior in full battle dress, grabbing the hair of another warrior. Both warriors have smoking foot motifs and smoking mirror designs in their headdresses, which identify them as followers of the Aztec god Tezcatlipoca. A series of designs run along the rim, along with primitive depictions of stars and what might be the planet Venus. Hair grabbing was a common symbol of defeat in Mesoamerica, but what meaning it could have in this context is unclear. Everything about the discovery of this 1,100-year-old Viking sword on a Norwegian mountain is strange. No Viking artifact has ever been located at such a high altitude before. It was nearly 5,500 feet above sea level, where the air is thin, and no evidence of any Viking life around it has been discovered. There wasn't even a body with the sword, which makes us wonder what happened to its owner. Also, given its age, it's in astonishingly good condition and appears to have been cast as one whole solid piece of steel. In every way imaginable, it's an out-of-place artifact, and one which was manufactured in a manner that seems entirely at odds with any other Viking sword ever discovered. The lack of oxygen, and the fact that the mountain is coated in ice for half of every year would preserve it to some extent, but even then it should be more rusted than this. What was this sword doing so far from home? And who made it in the first place? It must have taken someone a lot of time to carve out so much writing onto wooden objects on Easter Island. So we wish they'd also left us a translation guide so we could figure out what they were trying to tell us. The writing is known as rongorongo and takes the form of glyphs, but every attempt that's ever been made to translate it has failed. Explorer Eugene Eerie was the first to notice rangorongo when he arrived on the island in 1864, and testing revealed that the oldest wood that bears the writing comes from 17th century. Some much more recent examples, including one from around 1860, have been also found, but it's possible that they're just imitations of the original. The most common spoken language on the island today is Spanish, and none of the natives have regained the memory of what this language is, how to pronounce it, or how to decipher its meaning. If you think you might be able to succeed where countless others have failed, full copies of the script are available on the internet, and so you're welcome to attempt to translate it yourself. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon.